Hello everybody. Thank you very, very much for joining us. We are delighted to welcome you to the webinar. And I'd like to say thank you very much to Amanda Di Battista at the Center for Sustainable Food Systems for facilitating this webinar. We're really excited to be sharing the results from the OMAFRA-sponsored New Directions project that looked into sustainable local food hubs in Ontario. To do that, we have a really great panel with two people from OMAFRA. So we have Katie Nolan, who's Agriculture and Rural Economic Advisor out of Kentville, and also Kendal Donahue, who's an Agriculture Development Advisor out of Thunder Bay. And we're also delighted to have Phil Mount joining in to offer a practitioner perspective through his work at JustFood Ottawa. And I'm Alison Blay-Palmer, and I'm the Director for the Center for Sustainable Food Systems here at the Balsillie School for International Affairs at Wilfrid Laurier University. So what we're going to do first of all is I'm going to start off by presenting some of the survey results from the infographics, and then we're going to hand the presentation back and forth amongst ourselves and interweave infographic findings or survey findings and infographics with different perspectives from Katie, Kendal, and Phil. But just before we get started, I want to let everybody who's in the webinar know that first of all, we are recording this. So if you decide that you want to use the chat bar, which is fine, we're not probably going to be able to keep up with it because there's over 30 people on the call on the webinar now. That's fine, but your name will appear in the final webinar, and that could be posted in a public venue. So just to let you know about that. The other thing that you would want to know is if you do have a question, that please post that in the Q&A box. So if you have any questions about how to do that, let us know. Put that in the Q&A box, I guess. So just some technical information before we get started. So the first thing that I'd like to do is share with you the definition of and some basic information about what we did as we started out this project. The first thing that we needed to do was to come up with a definition of what a food hub was. And that was actually a little bit more challenging than you would think because this is a fairly new area of thinking. And and we wanted to be as broad and capture as much innovation as possible. So the definition that we settled on was included both the actual food hub, so the physical space of a food hub, or a virtual space, so some kind of online food hub innovation. And we targeted, obviously, spaces that collect and distribute food to processors, retailers, restaurants, and or consumers. And we also wanted to focus in on different dimensions of food hubs and recognize the fact that not only do food hubs act as distribution points in one way or another, but they can also provide space for other activities, including food preparation, handling, processing, education, and training as well. The other point that I'd like to raise with you right now is how we defined what a sustainable food system was, because that was really an important part of our research as well. So as you'll see at the bottom of the slide that you have in front of you, we define sustainable food systems as demonstrating varying degrees of economic viability, social justice, equity, and ecological regeneration from seed to plate from one degree or another. So these are aspirational goals. When we talk about sustainable food systems, they're not necessarily attained by all the organizations that were part of our work. So what I'm going to do now is start to present some of the results from this survey. This is data that was gathered in 2016 and that we analyzed last year and turned into some infographics. So the first information that I'm going to share with you is about defining and valuing local and sustainable food. So what did that mean to the people who responded to the survey? What did they mean when they said local and sustainable food? So as you can see from this bar chart, these results tell us that what people working along the sustainable food hub chain in Ontario value personally and what motivates them to do the work that they're doing. So what we see from this bar chart is that when we combine the green, the dark green with the lighter green, which is the high and moderately high priorities, what we discover is that 88% of respondents value where their food is grown, so where the food is grown, so that local dimension is very important. 78% of respondents emphasized ecological production, so how the food was being grown, as being important. 87% of people were focused on profitability, which is obviously a key sustainability dimension, because you can't have a viable business if you're not making any money. And lastly, another 83% of people who responded indicated that they valued social justice considerations. When we look at how local food was defined, what we see is that 90% of respondents, and here it's not going to add up to 100%, because people were able to select more than one or tick off more than one box. But we see that 90% of respondents saw local food as being within either 100 kilometers or less of where they are located, or within their county or region. When we ask people about local and sustainable food and how that adds value for both the producers and for communities, so how local food hubs help farmers and also the communities that the food hubs are located in, we got some interesting results as well. So in terms of the services that food hubs are able to provide to producers, what we found is that the dark green, which here are the services that are currently offered, with the light green with services that will be offered, so things that are in the planning stage versus things that are actually in operation. What we saw was transportation services were at the top of the list, and this was followed by educational activities such as food preservation and nutrition, helping farmers define new markets, and also providing branding and labeling services to producers. When we look at what food hubs are benefiting, how they're benefiting producers, what producers told us was that they were enabled to diversify their products and access new markets. That was a key benefit to them from being involved with food hubs. And they were also able to hire more people, so they had access to a bigger labor pool, and also they had access to labeling and an ability to increase sustainable production as a result of being involved in a food hub network. And also they had increased transportation opportunities. When we asked food hubs what kind of services they were providing to communities, so this is not producers, this is to the communities at large, the top things that came up were providing employment opportunities for youth. It was also noted that there were opportunities to provide food donations to food banks, pantries, and other community food security resources, as well as providing educational opportunities about what food system issues are all about. And this will come up again in slides later on in the presentation. So it's important to remember that this is something that food hubs are providing as services to communities, but it's also something that we'll see later is an important thing that needs to happen probably quite a bit more. So we're going to turn it over now to Katie and Kendal, and they'll talk about the food hub survey and some of the research that's happened through OMAFRA.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm just trying to switch to the next slide. There we go. Sorry about that. So thanks very much, Amanda, Alison, and Phil for inviting Kendal and myself to participate in this webinar. It's a really great opportunity for us, and we're excited to be a part of it because the research that's being presented today is very important to us and to the communities that we work with. So we really appreciate that opportunity. Alison did mention a little bit about what we do. Just to put it in regional context, I work out of the Kemptville office, which is near Ottawa, and I work primarily in the counties of Leeds, Grenville, Frontenac, and Lanark. And I'll let Kendal tell you about the region that she works in.
Great, yeah, thank you. And yeah, so I'm an agriculture development advisor working out of the Thunder Bay office. And so technically my area is about 100,000 square kilometers, although most of the agriculture, fortunately, is focused in and around Thunder Bay. And so I work a lot directly with businesses and that make up the local food economy. And I think one of the ingredients that makes food hubs possibly, and certainly the different pieces around aggregation and processing is having a thriving economy with different kinds of businesses that sell different kinds of foods. And so one of the things that Katie and I are going to be sharing with you today is painting a bit of a picture with about how OMAFRA supports different kinds of businesses, which in turn helps develop food hubs.
Okay, sorry, just having a hard time moving our slides. Hang on. There we go. Okay. So just by way of some background, we wanted to touch on some of the high-level ministry-wide program support that is available and has been available over the years to support local food systems, sustainable food systems, as well as food hubs. And there seems to be a magic... Sorry, I'm really struggling with these slides. There we go. Okay. So we'll start with research because, of course, the project that we're discussing today was supported by one of OMAFRA's research funding programs, and that is New Directions. But there are a couple of others. The OMAFRA University of Guelph Partnership is another academic research funding program, as well as KTT, which is Knowledge Translation and Transfer, which supports projects that take the results of academic research and extend those results into communities so people can use them. Little bit of a summary: since 2002, there have been 31 projects that have been specifically dedicated to research on local food and or local food systems. 4 of those were specific to food hubs. And of course, anyone in the research world knows that these projects tend to be large, very collaborative, involving a lot of researchers and spanning multiple years. It's worth noting that any research project that's funded with these provincial dollars does in some way, shape, or form support Ontario agriculture and or Ontario's rural communities. So there are some ways to draw links to a wide number of projects back to local food systems, etc. But these ones that I mentioned, the 31 specific to local food and the 4 on food hubs, are ones that were explicitly related to those sectors.
Right. So I think Katie's making a really important point that OMAFRA has for decades funded research, tech transfer, had different kinds of specialists, grant programs that businesses can access, and then positions like mine and Katie's that help support agri-food businesses in the community. But certainly within the last several years, there's been a lot more attention paid to the economic and social value of getting more locally grown food into local markets. And so because of the growing awareness about the importance of local food and definitely consumer demand for local, in 2013, the Ontario government passed the Local Food Act. And so what this did was set goals around things like increasing awareness of local food, encouraging the development of new markets for local, and also fostering successful and resilient local food economies. And so one of the things that came out of the Local Food Act was the Local Food Fund. That supported a number of projects around the province. In Thunder Bay, for example, Ontario Nature ran workshops on harvesting forest foods sustainably, and so that was both at the personal level, but also for businesses. And OMAFRA also provides dollars to the Greenbelt Fund, and the Greenbelt Fund has done a lot of great work over the years supporting projects that increase the amount of local food being purchased by the broader public sector. So again, in Thunder Bay, we've seen organizations applying to Greenbelt to help schools and long-term care facilities buy more local. And then there's also the local food investment fund that's delivered by Greenbelt. And so the fund has a broader set of objectives than just institutional purchasing. And essentially it's meant to deliver on the broader range of goals of the Local Food Act. So things like increasing food literacy and also supporting market access. And so that's where we've seen some organizations that have applied for funding to develop food hubs.
Yeah, and I would just add to that that we don't really have a breakdown of this specifically in terms of dollar amounts, but much of the resources that have been flowed through these programs to these projects have been related to some type of infrastructure development that's related to food hub initiatives in their community. So like I said, we don't have that breakdown, but those projects would be a part of the statistics that you're seeing there. So that's sort of the high level, a summary of some of the high level things that are happening at the ministry level. But Kendal and I, because we work in the field, wanted to talk as well about regional program support. There's a lot of unglamorous, ongoing day-to-day work that happens in the regions with field staff responding to the needs of communities to support food hub development. And we just wanted to describe a little bit about what that's like for us working in our respective regions. I don't seem to have control anymore of the slides. So yeah, perfect. Thank you. So in terms of regional support for local food research, as our food hub sector develops very rapidly in some regions, we really see a strong need for research like this project that can tell us what's happening in the sector and in turn help our communities to be better informed and help us to evaluate and continually improve our program offerings. So for this reason, it's always something we're very happy to be involved in and support. With this particular project, we were glad to be able to promote and disseminate the survey to the communities that we work with in our networks, and very glad to have Alison and Phil join us at the 2016 Eastern Ontario Local Food Conference to provide an update of on this work. And of course, we participate in webinars like this one. In addition, we do get involved in some types of research. I'll let Kendal tell you a little bit about some of that.
Sure. Right, sorry, we're on the right slide here. Okay, so yeah, definitely research is something that we're involved in all kinds of different ways. And if you think about it, it's very important for farms and processors in being successful. And then again, the link back to food hubs. And so generally businesses are not going to invest in research on their own. So there's therefore a role for government to play in all kinds of different research that benefits different types of businesses. So for instance, we fund crop research, and we also do regionally based research because growing conditions vary across our very large province. So for instance, in Thunder Bay, we have about 90 frost-free days and also 16 hours of daylight in the height of summer. So this is very different than in Southern Ontario. And it's because of northern-based research that we see farmers here growing corn, wheat, rye, flax, barley, canola, soybeans, and some of this is sold locally. And we even have farmers now, for instance, that are experimenting with malting barley, and it's partly because of the work that's been done at research stations up here, and also because there's a local market with local breweries. Another thing or initiative that I want to touch on, because it's newly released, is our Northern Ontario Agri-Food Strategy. And so this is very significant for us because it means that as a ministry, we'll be focusing more attention on supporting regional food economies in Northern Ontario. And it's because of the work that we've been doing around this strategy that we've actually we've undertaken a lot of research projects recently. And so, for instance, one of them is a dairy processing strategy. And so dairy is a very large sector in Northern Ontario relative to other sectors. And so we worked with dairy farmers of Ontario on developing a strategy that looked at ways to increase processing in the north. So most of our milk is actually processed in southern Ontario, so we're missing out on a lot of those jobs and businesses that would come from processing and selling to the local market. Just briefly, we're also looking to increase the number of livestock farms in the north. So land values are considerably less here. We have large tracts of land, so not smaller pockets of land that make it harder to farm as a unit. And we also have a good climate for growing cattle and grasses. And then we work across the value chain as well. So like food hubs are also concerned with the production, the processing, and distribution. As a ministry, we are too. So we're looking at different ways to support, for instance, critical pieces of infrastructure that businesses rely on. So right now we have a project underway that's looking at what the needs are for the meat processing sector, because that's a very important piece of infrastructure for all of the livestock farms that we have across the north.
Yeah, and I can just touch briefly on the local food business retention and expansion project, which took place several years ago. And business retention and expansion is a program that OMAFRA has, that communities can follow a template to consult with the business community. But this particular project was unprecedented in that it involved 9 different jurisdictions, was led out of Northumberland County and delivered in the wider region, and had never been focused on the local food sector before. So a new survey was developed specific to the local food sector. And that was a really ambitious, exciting project that we were really proud to partner on with our community partners. And it really provided a fantastic needs assessment of what agriculture and food businesses felt would be useful to them in supporting their sector, and help to provide what might be considered a primary feasibility study for the Ontario Agri-Food Venture Centre, which is now up and running in Northumberland County, serving the wider region, and is very successful. We also partner with our community groups on training. The Eastern Ontario Local Food Conference was started in 2011, when in East Region we identified that there was a need to develop a stronger community of practice and have a way for our practitioners to get access to timely technical information. Our first few themes as we started that conference, we're dealing with scaling up the local food sector and value chain development, really with an eye to seeing that there was really a strong argument for the development of food hubs in our community, a lot of people interested, and so we were able to explore those concepts with our local food sector in Eastern Ontario. Selling Food to Ontario is a workshop that we offer every year with various community partners that helps agriculture and food businesses explore different ways that they can add value and access larger markets. And Kendal, I'll pass it over to you to talk about sector-based workshops.
Great. Yeah. So we do workshops, or we at times offer workshops that are specific to different sectors. So whether it be dairy or beef, or the example I'm going to give is actually on poultry. So about 2 years ago, Chicken Farmers of Ontario created new programs that allows people to raise commercial flocks without having to become a larger poultry farm. So and purchasing all of the quota and the buildings and equipment that it would take to become a business like that. And so through the artisanal program, smaller family farms looking to direct market can apply for a license and raise 600 to 3,000 chickens. And so there's been a lot of interest among startups and also established businesses to diversify into poultry. And so last year we had workshops across the north with our poultry specialist, as well as someone from Chicken Farmers of Ontario, to do a bit of promotion of the program, and then also to do some education on things like ideal housing conditions, like lighting, disease, and options for disposing of animals. I'll leave it there. oh, sorry, next slide. Okay, so the other thing I was going to talk about today was some of the other ways that we support businesses is as an ag development advisor, we work with other ministries, we work with other economic development organizations on different kinds of projects like research, and then we also, or I work directly with different agricultural associations. And one of the bigger parts of my job is definitely one-on-one business support. So to give an example, just a made-up example, you might have a farmer that comes to see you who grew up on a pick-your-own strawberry farm outside of Thunder Bay. They've been out of the business for about 10 years, but the land is still owned by his family, and he wants to get back into farming. And so he might want to diversify into a different kind of crops, and possibly, like using the example of, for instance, Haskap berries that they've grown in or successfully in northeastern Ontario, and maybe want to start up a winery. And so we would meet, this fictitious business person and I would meet and talk about their business plan. And so, for instance, where are they planning to sell it? So what's their market? How are they pricing their product and why? What's their production plan? What kind of equipments do they need? What are some of the assumptions that they're making, and what kind of challenges can we foresee that they might face and how to address them? And so we would definitely look at those different aspects of their business. We'd also talk about what kind of regulations that may apply to them. So for instance, labeling requirements or water taking permits for irrigation. We'd go over what kind of other resources are available in the community, financing, and then also, connecting them with other experts within the ministry that could answer some of the more technical questions.
So in addition to that, we also do quite a bit of work with organizations. I think anyone who's had a few years in working in the local food sector knows that it really was the not-for-profit sector, and in many cases still is, that's doing the heavy lifting. The food policy councils, there are many across Ontario, and they're all different shapes and sizes, but that's one type of organization that we may work with in various ways depending on what their needs are and their interests. We also provide facilitation services and have quite a range of organizational development resources that can be provided to not-for-profit organizations. So in just wrapping up, we'd like to again offer our congratulations to the researchers for concluding this part of the study, and just reiterate that this information is so important to us, to the emerging local food economy that that we all try to support, and we're really looking forward to putting it to use to continually improve what we can offer to our communities.
There. Thanks so much, Katie and Kendal. That was really a wonderful overview, and lots of great examples of all the fantastic work that OMAFRA is engaged in. We have a couple of questions that popped up specific to the survey, so I'm just going to answer those. But if anybody has any questions for Kendal or for Katie, you can type them into the box now. We're going to have several, sort of a stop and go approach to this webinar, so you'll have other chances to ask questions. But we just thought we'd give you a chance to raise issues as we went, because it's there's a lot of complicated information that's being presented. So we thought that was a good way to go about this. So the first question, a great one, is, well, they're all good questions, obviously, but this is a really good nutsy boltsy question. And that is, how many food hubs responded? So we had a total of 125 respondents for the 2016 survey, 187 for the 2014 survey. And the second question that we have is, please clarify for the last slide, so that would be the last slide on the infographics, are farmers hiring more people because they work with food hubs, or are food hubs helping farmers hire, attract labor? And it's actually the latter. So our findings revealed that the food hubs are actually helping to connect people who are looking for employment with producers. So that was the function that was identified. So seeing no other questions, I'm going to go to the next part of the presentation now, which is to give you some more information about the Food Hub survey and share some more infographics with you. So what we're going to talk about next are expansion opportunities, and we're going to start with food hubs. So the first set of results that we'd like to share from this part of the survey look at things from the food hub perspective. So what we see here is that most opportunities for expansion are seen to exist by food hubs. So this is not distributors or processors or producers, but this is actually for food hubs. The greatest opportunities are seen, as you can tell from this slide, in both farmers markets and also storefront operations. Next were online stores, followed by restaurant caterers and bakeries, and also corner stores. So these are the top things that were identified, excuse me, in the 2016 survey. What's interesting is in the bottom, because we were particularly interested in what is, I don't know if it's affectionately called the mush sector or not, but if we look at municipalities, universities, schools, hospitals, and other public institutions as providing stable buying opportunities for food hubs, the range for those different opportunities started at 20% for hospitals and went up to 31% for daycares. So I think that's an interesting finding in the context of where new markets can be developed for food hubs in the future, or where food hubs see opportunities for themselves. Sorry, okay, Amanda's on it. So next, if we think about the challenges that food hubs identified for engaging with these opportunities, not surprisingly, the very first and largest challenge was access to capital. So that was 53% of people identified that as their biggest challenge. The second challenge at 52%, which is very much on a par, is access to reliable seasonal and part-time labor. And then the third most important challenge was meeting regulations of one kind or another. If we go to the next slide, sorry. Okay, so if we think about expansion opportunities for producers, what we discovered was 90% of producers, so nearly all of them, want to increase their overall sales. So that's not a big surprise. However, when we asked farmers about whether they wanted to increase their acreage, only 32% of people surveyed said that they wanted to increase their overall land use. So that's an important thing to know as well when we're thinking about how this expansion would take place and what it would look like. So in order to address these expansion opportunities, barriers need to be addressed. So in order for farmers to be able to capture the opportunities that they see within the food hub space, what they need to have happen first and foremost is for consumers to be educated more about the benefits of local sustainable food. The next barrier that they face, or the next two barriers that came up, were also so comparable with the food hub findings: securing capital and also increasing the number of workers available for farms. And then the fourth category, the next two categories in the fourth place, I guess, were access to purchase or rent more land. And also, surprisingly, this came up in this survey and not in the first survey, but given conditions in terms of the cost of heating fuel, this really came up as an important consideration for farmers, and we hadn't seen that before. So that's notable if we're thinking about the first set of results versus the second. So now we're going to talk a little bit about expansion opportunities for processors and distributors. And what we heard from them was 87% of processors and distributors wanted to increase their business. This compared to it was identical, sorry, to the 87% in the 2014 survey. So that was a consistent finding from one year to the next. When we look at the barriers to expansion for processors and distributors, what we see is, and here it made sense to compare 2014 findings with 2016. If we didn't compare them before because the results were really, really similar. But what we saw here was a bit of a shift. So we wanted to point that out because we thought it was potentially significant. But I need to qualify that with, we had a larger survey group respond in the first round, so 187 respondents versus 125 in 2016. And we do not know who these individual respondents are. So we have to take these findings in that light. But that said, there seemed to be a shift, so we thought we would point that out as part of our infographic and results reporting. So securing capital is still the biggest category, the most important focus for processors and distributors, as with everybody else. What became apparent, though, if we compare, excuse me, the 2016 barriers versus the 2014, is that supply, so getting access to food, was a challenge for 62% of respondents versus only 33% in 2014. So that was quite a jump. Increasing staffing was also a bigger problem in 2016 versus 2014. And again, we're seeing a demand for consumer education. So getting the word out to the public about the value of supporting local and sustainable food systems. And the other thing that became apparent is increasingly in demand is the need for business development assistance. So going on to the next slide, we're going to shift things over to Phil now, and he's going to talk to us about insights from JustFood Ottawa.
Thanks, Alison. So I'm just to start here, Rich Pirog at the Center for Regional Food Systems, who has helped to conduct the US Food Hub survey over the last few years, has said infamously, "You've seen one food hub, you've seen one food hub." And so how this plays out on the ground, it comes down to things like scale of operations. Thanks, Amanda. And how much produce can be maximized or mobilized within a region, the size of the local markets, the organizations, institutions, and agencies that both can and choose to access it. But also, what's the role of the food hub in the value chain? So is the food hub going to act as an online wholesaler, or will it take on things like aggregation, storage, and distribution? Will the hub purchase the products or act as an intermediary? One of the other factors that we're increasingly understanding as instrumental to how a food hub develops is its mission. So food hubs fall on a continuum from those whose goals prioritize enhancing food supply chains to those who focus on engaging food systems change. I just want to point out the reference there is the Journal of Agriculture, Food Systems and Community Development. Just as an aside, that journal is now open access, becoming the world's first community-supported journal. And it has a wealth of information on food hubs in the last few years. So definitely take a look at that, the Journal of Agriculture, Food Systems and Community Development. And we'll be presenting some of this information in an article in that coming up this year. So the final point I just quickly want to make here is one of governance, which influences the other 3 points. So it really does matter from the outset whether a food hub is established as a private for-profit, not-for-profit, co-op, public, or some combination thereof. This is going to influence how the hub interacts with suppliers, markets, funders, and the local community at large. So a couple of examples. FoodShare is a large not-for-profit social enterprise organization in Toronto that I'm sure many on this webinar are familiar with. Operates the Good Food Warehouse, from which they supply a number of significant programs, including the Good Food Box program, which delivers over 30,000 boxes with over 500,000 pounds of fresh produce to over 100 drop-off points across the city. The Good Food Warehouse offers economies of scale, their purchasing power delivers efficiencies and cost savings, their support for local business drives local economic development, and these programs facilitate local and regional food distribution. So this is a markedly different example than, for example, the Two Rivers Food Hub. And I see Bruce is on the webinar. Bruce, you can smack me if I say anything wrong here about Two Rivers. For those who don't know, in Smith Falls, Ontario, Two Rivers is a not-for-profit social enterprise with a mission to increase markets for local farmers. This is a more conventional model of a small regional aggregator and distributor that sprang up when a regional healthcare facility was abandoned by the province in 2008. The new food hub had immediate access to large commercial scale kitchen equipment for processing excess produce with no market and to rent to local processors. Their location means that they offer an outlet to a fairly large catchment area of underserved rural producers, but their closest markets of any size are Kingston and Ottawa. Which brings me to JustFood Ottawa, which started as the Ottawa Food Security Council and developed as a food systems organization, which, like FoodShare, has many tentacles. Given the rural nature of the city of Ottawa, though, one important program over the last decade has been Savor Ottawa. In the center here, focused on bringing together regional producers with restaurateurs, retailers, delivering high-profile events, developing other markets. That's the problem when you use the annotate tool, you can't control your screen anymore. There we go. So this includes an online market, Savor Ottawa Online, and localfreshness.ca, which was a joint marketing arrangement with two regional food hubs, the Ottawa Valley Food Co-op and Le Marché de l'Outaouais. So together with JustFood, they promoted each other's local food online opportunities in the region. This e-commerce site is now run through a community food hub facility, which also houses the Ottawa Incubator Kitchen, where local processors can scale up their operations. That's interesting. Amanda, do you know how I get rid of an annotation? Hey, there we go. Never mind. Right, so local processors can scale up their operations with 24/7 rental access to commercially equipped kitchens, to scale up recipes, streamline processing and packaging, and use the latest CFA compliant systems while working beside sorry about that. I've lost control of this again. I'm sorry, Amanda. Wonderful. Thank you. Working beside other starting entrepreneurs and taking advantage of existing services, including distribution, which is supplied by the organic distributor on site. Because the Ottawa Incubator Kitchen is one component of the Ottawa Food Hub, which is a not-for-profit social enterprise created in partnership between JustFood and North House Foods, the Natural Gourmet and Mountain Path. So partnering with an existing business with full facilities enabled the Food Hub to establish itself without significant overhead for capital purchases or of facilities or equipment. I'm going to leave it right there right now. Amanda, you can take back control.
So at this point, as far as we can tell, we don't have any, oh, excuse me. Okay, we do have a couple of questions, sorry. We have one question: were the opportunities for growth presented as boxes to check, or did respondents list what they saw in response to open-ended questions? The responses that we're presenting right now were checking boxes kinds of things, but there were opportunities to provide us with information in addition to what we were asking for in the check boxes or sliding scales. It depended. And there's a second question using this definition, social enterprises. So I think, Phil, this might be for you. Social enterprises are defined as organizations created to pursue social missions or purposes that operate to create community benefit, regardless of ownership or legal structure, and with various degrees of financial self-sufficiency, innovation, and social transformation. Did you get that? Okay. Would you speak to how a food hub could be a social enterprise?
For sure. Thanks for the question, Marie. And sort of this goes back to the comment that I was making earlier. So the model of governance definitely matters. And certainly, as with many other terms that we're speaking about today, social enterprise is one of those where we see people using the term to refer to enterprises that fall in different places on this continuum about which we're speaking, right? So clearly, local economic development and regional development is a laudable goal and delivers value to local communities. And if done with the social goals at heart, and certainly intending simply for the social mission, operating the food hub as a social mission, then it certainly, you could describe that as a social enterprise without a doubt. I think really it's interesting because there are definitely food hubs that you would describe as not-for-profit and socially motivated enterprises that call themselves for-profit enterprises. So there are times when the language is rather confusing, simply because people quite often, for whatever reason, decide that the description of for-profit or not-for-profit either should or should not apply to what they're doing. So there is some confusion around that, but certainly food hubs that set themselves up as an enterprise in the middle that does not intend to pull profit from the food chain as one of their goals of the enterprise, then certainly fulfills that mandate as a filling a necessary component of a regional chain without pulling from that food chain itself.
Okay, there's another question for you, Phil. So just wondering, from Genevieve, just wondering if you could tell us more about the distribution done or offered by the Ottawa Food Kitchen.
Right. Hi, Jen. So the Ottawa Food Kitchen itself does not take on distribution, but the organic business that is established in the food hub, that is Northhouse Foods, is an organic distributor across the region, all of Ontario and Western Quebec as well. And so they will easily take on any distribution needs of the social enterprise or the enterprises that establish themselves at the Ottawa Food Kitchen. But typically the folks who are taking advantage of the Ottawa Food Kitchen are trying to scale up their small food production enterprise into, like, take the next step essentially. So again, many of them, don't want to jump into the distribution game, so they take advantage of whatever distribution facilities are available to them right there at the hub.
Okay, and we have, thanks for that, Phil. We have one more question. Oh, sorry. two more questions. One I can answer really quickly, actually both pretty quickly. The first is, many people are in business because of their social, how many people are in business because of their social convictions? I think based on the Food Hub survey, we can address that question by saying that of the respondents, when we were asking them why they were, what motivated them to be doing what they're doing, 83% indicated that they were doing it because of social justice motivated reasons. So I don't know if that answers your question. If it doesn't, feel free to post another question. And then James asked us, have the survey results been published yet? What we've done is we posted the infographics on the FLEdGeResearch.ca website, so you can get access to the infographics there. If you would be interested in other information, we would be happy to talk to you about that. So what we're going to do now, seeing no other questions, is just turn our attention to the sales. So what's happening in terms of sales for these operations, and where are they getting their funding sources from? So the first thing that we're going to look at is gross median sales. And when we look at that, we see that the biggest category here is in the 100 to 250K mark. But we also notice that there's a significant number of people that are making less than $25,000 a year operating within this Food Hub business realm. When we look at and we think about farmers and where their point of sales are, the most important point of sale for farmers is through on-farm retail operations and direct point of sale. When we asked people about their funding sources and barriers in terms of their startup capital, so this was where did people go to get their business operations launched and off the ground, what we found was 52% of people use their own private investment or their own capital, or were able to source private investors, oftentimes family members or friends. And 52% relied on banks and credit unions for loans. Government funding came in at 13%, and then there were a series of other less important funding sources that were leveraged. When we, this is sort of a consolidation of what you've heard before, but just to sort of drive home the point that funding is really a critical issue for people trying to get into this Food Hub space. For the distributors, 56% of people said that they were unable to expand because they lacked enough funding. On the producer side, it was 51%, and on the processing side, it was 46%. Only 33% for the retail sector and direct sales sector. So when we think about this space as an opportunity for increasing local and sustainable food sales, what we found was that 98% of people surveyed in 2014 were interested in increasing local sales. This dropped off by a small percentage to 95% in our 2016 survey. And then when we talked to people, or people responded to our questions about where is your business coming from, what we found was that 2/3 of customers have buyers within 100 kilometers of their Food Hub's operations. So this is a significant percentage of operators, but it's also notable that this is down somewhat from 76% in the previous 2014 survey. When we talk to when we compare 2014 and 2016 results, what we find is that the number of small and mid-sized suppliers to Food Hubs has increased steadily for about half of the operations. So when we're talking to people about where they're getting their supply from, and whether they're dealing with large-scale operations or smaller and mid-sized suppliers, there's been a steady increase for over half of the people surveyed over the time frame that we were talking to them about. And for 31% stayed the same, but there was only a slight decrease or a steady decrease for about 11% of the people surveyed. So this is good news for the local food scene and Food Hub operations within Ontario. So now what we're going to do is turn it back to Phil for his last part of the presentation, and then we'll open it up to the floor again for question and answer.
Great, thanks, Alison. I'm going to wrap up with some considerations for there we go. Considerations for food hubs, lessons that we've seen in the last decade of research on the topic, which in a nutshell comes down to innovation, collaboration, and perspiration. The potential benefits of hubs are pretty well rehearsed and familiar to everyone. Katie and Kendal did a great job of talking about some of the benefits that we've seen, not just the spin-off benefits of these expanding new markets on local economic development, but the practical impacts of increased regional food distribution, making local fresh food more accessible to all, particularly where community food security agencies can work together to achieve economies of scale through collective purchasing power. This expanding market in turn encourages new growth from local producers, more opportunities for new producers, and more awareness from consumers, local planners, regulators, politicians. It's difficult to say which of these possible benefits will play an important role in any given region. Some of these may in fact turn out to be a barrier in a certain region, but one thing that we found is that innovation in this context so often springs from the unexpected synergies that happen when you bring together enterprises and people that might not otherwise have met in a conventional food chain through partnerships and relationships developed by the food hub's many outreach activities. Jeff Farbman at the Laurier Centre, a leader in food hub research, has suggested that some of this work is among the least rewarded by the market, but also the most important when it comes to the impact of food hubs. He said that increasing access to underserved populations, training farmers in market readiness, creating new sustainable growing protocols, these are all part of the important but unprofitable work done by many hubs. And we've highlighted some of the challenges and limitations here today. Alison did a good job of explaining how funding, both startup and long-term, is always a challenge, but it typically gets a fair amount of attention. Perhaps less attention is paid to seeding and continually encouraging an expansion of supply. I think these two surveys give us a little bit of an indication of how that's become an increasing issue between 2014 and 2016. One of the things I noted in one of your slides, Alison, was that suddenly the challenge of meeting supply had become a more pressing issue for some of the hubs. And because this chicken and egg thing, right, can be a real hub killer, many hubs have been very intentional in the design of their market. So bringing in producers, processors, institutional purchasers in an attempt to take some of the guesswork out of the production volume planning, because very few farmers are going to consider doubling production volumes without some kind of market assurance. Transportation and distribution can also become a challenge, and there's typically a lot of competition and duplication in this, to the extent that many hubs decide to partner with outside distributors. Again, Bruce, correct me if I'm mischaracterizing this, but Two Rivers initially collaborated with a local food delivery company, Wendy's Mobile Market. It's very strong and positive relationship, but after 2 years of trying, they couldn't find a mechanism that worked well for both. So last summer, Two Rivers also jumped into the delivery game. And I know Bruce has highlighted that became a very challenging and suddenly brand new facet of the hub work that they had to learn in a very short order. So as a consequence, they started up their own online market, delivering to various depots across the region. But of course, their region serves Kingston, where Wendy's Mobile Market had already developed a decade worth of clientele. And when you already have sort of a positive, strong relationship that you don't want to jeopardize, these things become a challenge for a food hub. And just finally here, some of the keys to success. Well, persistent creativity, right? Finding workarounds to a lack of funding for social enterprise, using a social enterprise approach to maximize program funds, for example, build and expand gradually, but also build relationships across different sectors by engaging with the local community. Some of these things, of course, are more easily said than done. That working across the food chain. So Gavin Dandy, who is one of the leads at the Seed in Guelph, and also at Everdale, many of you may know him from his Everdale role, said that we believe that sustainability comes from pursuing a mixture of revenue sources, farm sales income, program fees where practical, grants from public sources, support from private foundations, corporate sponsorships, fundraisers, a solid base of private donors. These financial tensions do not mean that a food hub's financial and social goals and objectives are contradictory. In many ways, these tensions help propel our work forward. He makes a great point in that the tensions that can so often cause challenges are also potential sources of innovation. But of course, Gavin's an optimist. One could easily say that the potential sources of innovation, such as the opportunity to collaborate with a diverse set of partners across the food value chain, well, these things that could be benefits are also potential challenges for a food hub. And this means that rather than a straightforward understanding of the food value chain, we're often faced with parties and interests that pull in different directions, even when they share broad objectives like social justice and food access. And those forces of tension are most often supplied by the difficulties of funding operations over the long term in a way that works for all parties involved. As I mentioned off the top, food hubs fall on a continuum that ranges from those that prioritize making the food supply chains work for regional systems, farmers, and markets, to those who focus on engaging food systems change. And while these may not be contradictory goals, attempting to decide on funding priorities means that these goals don't always pull in the same direction at any given hub. So food hubs are complex beasts that clearly often do more than aggregate and distribute food, but the more complex they get, the more they demand the collaboration of multiple actors with competing priorities, and the more we must pay attention to supporting the social infrastructure that's required to govern these complex pieces of physical infrastructure that have been funded to date. And I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you. So that's great, Phil. Thank you very much. And we would also like to thank everybody who participated in both in the case study work. So if you're interested in getting access to the case studies, you can do this through the nourishingcommunities.ca website. We have more than 20 case studies related to food hubs that were developed in 2015, so you can check those out. And the infographics are also available on the Nourishing Communities the Nourishing Communities website, as well as the FLEdGE website. And before we turn back to our question and answer, I'd just like to give a shout out to everybody who participated in all the research, because without your time and commitment and dedication to answering all the questions that we ask you, we wouldn't be here. So thank you very much for sharing your time and your resources and your insights with us. So we're gonna just check and see if we have any questions at this point. I'm not seeing any new questions. I think we've addressed all the questions that were asked of us so far. Is there anything else that anybody would like to know? Or Kendal or Katie, is there anything that you would like to add following what Phil has shared? We're just unmuting you now. So if there's anything that you would like to add in, please go ahead.
Well, I maybe have a question, and maybe I missed this earlier in the presentation, but when people were responding to the survey, did they self-identify as a distributor or a farmer or other? Is there any way to kind of measure who was responding to what, or, you know, you demonstrated that there were some trends in some of the areas around things that they were finding to be challenges, and it changed, you know, from one year to the next. But it could obviously just vary depending on how many people answered from what background.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this was a really tough one because we knew going in that we didn't want to limit people's responses. And we also knew that there were people who were doing many things that could be called food hub activities, including, for example, a producer who might have a retail operation on their farm and was aggregating food from other farms.
Right.
So we were very deliberate in not asking people to self-identify, but the way that we set up the survey allowed them to answer the parts of the survey that they felt they could answer. So somebody might answer just the producer questions as a supplier into the food hub system, or they might have answered the supplier and the food hub parts of the questionnaire, depending on how they saw themselves. And we were clear about that as part of the preamble for the survey work, so that people were able to figure that out for themselves. But it was a bit of a dilemma, and that's why we had a very broad definition of what a food hub was all about, because we realized that that was going to be a bit of a challenge for this research. And we also were able to address that through our case study work. So if you're interested in getting, I'm sure, Kendal, you've had a chance to look at the case studies, but as I mentioned before, they're available on Nourishing Communities and FLEdGE websites.
How did you promote the survey? Did you send it to specific hubs that you had in mind, or?
Yeah, we promoted it through various channels that we have available to us through Nourishing Communities and through FLEdGE and also through OMAFRA. But one of the other things that we did was we created a database using local food trail maps and local food maps. So we aggregated that information across the province and actually developed a list of over 1,200 different operations that were considered to be part of this food hub system, this local sustainable food hub system within Ontario. And that was our key basis for doing this research. But we also obviously distributed and let a lot of, through our various networks, let lots of people know and entreated them to participate in the research. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting research. Thank you.
We have a good question here that I can't answer based on the analysis that we've done so far. So the question is growth in food hubs coming more from produce, protein, or processed goods? We haven't done that level of analysis, and I'd actually have to go back to the survey to see if we could answer that question or not. But Leanne, if you want to get in touch with me, I can do some number crunching and see if I can answer that question for you. Right now, I don't have an answer to that question, unfortunately. But that's a good one. So I'm not seeing any other questions. I don't know, Katie, if there's anything you'd like to add?
I don't know if I can add anything of substance, but I did just want to briefly touch on the conversation we were having about social enterprise. And Phil, I think you did a great job sort of weaving the complexity of that issue and how a food hub might identify or not identify with that particular category. But I did just want to mention, as Phil, you did a couple of times, that we do have Bruce and Lo on the webinar, and I know we aren't able to open the participants. But Bruce, if you have anything you want to type in, just because Two Rivers has identified as a social enterprise, and it's just really interesting to look at this sector and what opportunities and, you know, the advantages and disadvantages. There he is. of you know, those governance questions. And I think you know, looking at issues of economic impact could factor into a operations decision as to whether they want to identify as a social enterprise. There's some tremendous studies that show food hubs having some really phenomenal economic impacts, particularly in economically depressed communities. Is that to be considered a social enterprise, or should that be an expectation that we have of all food hubs? You know, food hubs that have more of a social mission in terms of food access and affordability, you know, may have a different perspective. But anyway, just to reiterate, it is really important question and can have implications for what types of support are available to a food hub as they evolve their operation.
Well said, Katie.
Bruce, we're not able to hear you. We've unmuted you on our end. I'm not sure if you need to unmute on your end or not. These things are mysterious, eh? We've got. Sorry, Bruce, we're having some technical problems bringing you into the conversation. I apologize. We're going to keep trying to bring you in. In the meantime, we have another question from Genevieve. Any perspective on growth potential for producers, since most don't want to increase acreage? What are some avenues for growth? I think some of the avenues for growth that were identified through the research are increasing linkages with distributors. I think that was one of the things that became obvious, was that there's a gap between getting the food from the farm over to a food hub, and distribution is a key link there. I think that what we also need to be doing is addressing the capitalization issue. That was a clear barrier for producers in increasing their capacity to participate in food hub activities. And we also need to address, and I think this was the access to capital issue was something across the board as well for everybody who responded. But one of the things that was interesting that became more apparent in this round of the survey was the need for public education and raising awareness about the benefits of local and sustainable food hub activities in the province. So I think those are all things that could be addressed in terms of growing opportunities for farmers. I don't know, Bruce, if you want to try and jump in again. Do you want to? I'm really sorry. We're not hearing you again. It's unmuted on our end. We're madly clicking buttons here. Sorry. I'm sorry that we're not having any success. If you can type into the chat box, maybe, if you're a really fast typer, maybe we could share some of your insights. Yeah, we can see your chat, Bruce. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. So maybe thanks for trying to jump in there, and Katie, thanks for pointing that out. I'm sorry that we haven't been able to bring you in live, Bruce. We're still trying to work out the glitches with this webinar platform. So thanks for your patience, everybody. Okay, so then there's one last question. Do farmers seem a more likely avenue for supporting local food sales growth after reviewing this material, because most of the money goes to social organizations? I think that's what that question's asking. I don't know, Phil, if you want to address that question or not, or if you feel based on...
Sorry, Alison, I can't actually see that question yet. Could you just read that once again for me?
Yeah, beg your pardon, of course. So the question is, do farmers seem a more likely avenues for supporting local food sales growth after reviewing this material, because most of all the money goes to social organizations? So maybe we could get a bit of a clarification from the person who asked that question. I'm not sure what the last bit is getting at, if you don't mind. So maybe just to address the first part of the question until we get clarification about the second part, Phil.
Well, I think maybe what the question is suggesting is that if these organizations, for example, food hubs, are stepping in to increase regional sales, then the money would go to them. And I would say to that that's why many of these food hubs are establishing as social enterprises or as not-for-profits. That is, they're recognizing that any new piece that's added into the food chain is going to be pulling money from either farmers or consumers at either end of this new food value chain. And of course, they don't really want to do that. So what they're attempting to do is establish these intermediary but necessary pieces of a new expanded food chain, only at basically at cost, or at, you know, what it costs to do the work of acting as an intermediary between farmers and institutions or larger consumers, if you will. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were getting at, but I think certainly, you know, going to directly to the farm through community supported agriculture or through farmers markets is one way of making sure that, you know, your consumer dollar supports local food growth. But at the same time, I mean, that is why folks who are setting up these food hubs are thinking deeply about, you know, how do we support growth in our local area without pulling from, let's face it, what is a, you know, a very small food dollar and hard to spread that value around. So they're really putting some thought into how they can do that without pulling money out of the pockets of the local farmers who are producing the food.
Okay, thanks for taking that question, Phil. And Bruce has chimed in and said that he can answer questions by chat if anyone would like him to do that. He said he wasn't a part of the original decision to set up Two Rivers as a not-for-profit, but it's his understanding that access to funding was a factor. So to add to what Phil has just said, is there anything else that you'd like to tell us, Bruce? Okay, well, maybe while Bruce is busy considering the question and considering typing, we have another question, more of a comment than a question. It's very difficult for producer businesses to receive support to grow. For many years now, the supports have only gone to the intermediaries. Small support networks usually don't have cost savings versus the established operators. These longer chains make costs rise instead of supporting short chain development. So thank you very much, whoever shared that insight with us. That's much appreciated. I don't know if Katie or Kendal or Phil, you have a comment to add to that?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind chiming in and I guess to clarify some of the discussion that Kendal and I brought forward regarding different funding programs. I apologize if we gave the impression that those funding programs are only available to organizations. Many of them are available to businesses, in particular the Growing Forward 2 programs that have just sunsetted, and we're waiting for the new programs to be launched next fiscal. But those were programs that were cost share resources available to agriculture or food businesses. There was also a category for organizations and collaborations, but that many of the avenues that are available are businesses are eligible to apply for projects that would support their expansion.
And regionally also, in Northern Ontario, we have what's called the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund Corporation. And so this is a program that's funded through the Ministry of Northern Development and Mines. And there's a category for startups and also for expansions, and both primary producers as well as processors and other kinds of businesses that feed into the agriculture sector can apply for that. And there's no requirement to be a certain scale.
Okay, that's really good to know. Thanks for clarifying that. Much appreciated. While you were talking, Bruce chimed in again. So thanks for that, Bruce. And I'm not sure I totally get, because I know when I type, I do it note form. So I don't want to misrepresent what you're saying. So maybe you could nod if I'm getting it, or go like this if I'm not. But I think you're commenting on the model of Two Rivers as a not-for-profit, and the way that it also pushes back against the negative stereotypes of middlemen. Is that what you're getting at there? Yes? Oh, yes. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay. That wraps up the questions that we've received so far. Although there was a bit of a chat going on, and I'll just share that with everybody. Genevieve chimed in again and said, the last question made me think, do you have a sense from producers whether they feel food hubs financially work for farmers, or which part are more profitable for them? And Phil answered chicken and egg, which yeah, that resonates. Does anybody, Kendal or Katie, do you want to add to that?
Well, I'm certainly not privy to, that kind of granular level of financial information from food hubs, but I do know that all the food hubs I'm familiar with have a mission stated explicitly or implicitly that that they are there to provide economic opportunities for small and medium-sized farm and food businesses in their communities. And it seems that, we did have a period of many years prior to, sort of the recent expansion in food hub activity in the province, where it did seem like most of the direct market channels that farmers had available to them to access the local food system or the local food market were reaching saturation, and there needed to be a next level of investment in infrastructure and market channel distribution to allow local food to move beyond what some might consider to be niche markets, and to be available more broadly to more consumers. And I think that is the intention. Whether it works that way functionally for every producer who uses the services of a food hub, another discussion. But I certainly think that the intention is for to promote and support economic prosperity for the ag sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was reflected in the question we asked about people's motivations. So profitability was definitely right up there for everybody along the food chain. So I think that's along with ecological production and also with social justice values. So I think that the Food Hub survey results reflect that, as do the case studies that we did as well. So thanks for that, Katie. Phil, you look like you have something else to say.
Yeah, just to tack on to that, Alison. I mean, certainly some of the food hubs in the U.S. Have a bit more experience with this, but I've seen examples where this is an annual piece with the food hub. Bruce, I don't know if this is your experience as well, but where they survey their largest suppliers, their producers, and determine, with the help of some of their largest purchasers, institutions, and restaurants, what their needs are, what their requirements are for the upcoming season, and establish that they're going to have the production that's going to be able to meet their needs as a food hub. And certainly I've seen this happening a lot more. There's a lot more intentionality in sort of the established hubs as far as ensuring that they have a market that is going to meet the growing needs of producers, to enable those producers to more confidently, you know, expand their production to make the hub grow and establish everyone's mutual profitability.
Well, and I would just add the perspective of an area that does not yet have a food hub, but certainly there's been a lot of discussions about whether we're ready for a food hub and what that would look like and who it would be for. From the perspective of farmers, certainly some of the things that I hear is that there's a bit of an unwillingness to let go of that distribution piece for a number of reasons, one of them being that margins are very tight, and so having to pay that for that service to happen when you could drive into the city and then drop that product off yourself. And then there's also the relationship piece that people value, and going to see those businesses weekly and let them know what's available and whatnot. And there's a bit of a fear sometimes. I wonder if someone else was to take on that work for them, whether they would lose potentially those businesses, and being able to have some feedback on their product quality and other things.
Thanks, Kendal. Those are really important points. And Bruce has also added to the conversation, saying that their feasibility study phase prior to establishing their service was critical to the success that they've had. So that planning dimension and scoping things out was really important to the success of Two Rivers. So that's also a really important point. That's very much worth noting. I'm just mindful of time. We only have 2 minutes left. So does anybody have anything, Phil or Kendal or Katie or Bruce, by text? Is there anything that you would like to add before we sign off?
Not for me, thanks.
Any final words of wisdom about food hubs? No? Okay, well.
Just one thing, thank you again for doing this research. And as I mentioned just a second ago, that we're in Thunder Bay, there's been conversation for years about whether to develop a food hub. And so certainly it's been very useful being able to pick Phil's brain a little bit and ask him some questions about learnings from other places. It really makes the process a lot easier, and just being able to have someone who's talked to so many different kinds of hubs and pull from that.
Well, it's with the support of OMAFRA that all of this work happened in new directions. So you're really, everybody is grateful to OMAFRA for having the vision to be able to make this possible. And also thanks very much for participating in this call. We're really glad that we were able to offer this webinar, and thanks to everybody for such great questions, and to our panelists, Katie, Kendal, and Phil, and Bruce, our unofficial participant, and everybody who called in, and also everybody who participated in the case study work, and also the survey work. So thanks very much, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.